800
where the jazz is always as smooth as the sun.
The government! Lizard people!
Don't touch that dial now.
You're listening to the
Audio Junkie Podcast.
We're just getting started.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Audio Junkie Podcast.
Hello.
First episode, baby.
Right.
All right. Well, I am your first host here, Christian Miracle. We're probably just going to refer to me as Chad for the remainder of this show, but that is who I am. Who is this lovely man sitting across from me?
I am Heath. I'm the Heathmeister.
Oh, yeah, my good friend.
Hunter Helfrich here, but you can refer to me as Keith.
Keith. I will probably still call you Hunter for the remainder of the show, but...
Tis okay.
Oh, yes, of course. So, the show, what is it? What are y'all about to start listening to if you're starting on this episode here? Well, what you can expect is essentially kind of like a behind the music type deal where we're pretty much going to be talking about a lot of the history of the bands that we go over from episode to episode. For the most part, we'll be pretty much keeping one episode per band unless they have a pretty extensive discography or story behind a lot of what was going on behind the scenes, as well as one of our main focuses for this show for whenever we do episodes on bands in particular is the discography itself, kind of going in chronological order, talking about what the music was, our opinions on it, and kind of some highlights of each of these albums, so on and so forth. That's pretty much the idea of what we got coming up, as well as we might even do some side stuff about like just kind of off-the-wall topics on music itself.
Little gear here and there, you know.
Oh, yeah, so we'll have
Get into some of the sounds and textures of these albums that we'll be talking about also.
Hell yeah, because we'll be pretty much we'll have a little bit of everything for everybody, hopefully, between a lot of the people who are just your casual music listener all the way up to maybe even musicians like ourselves, because Hunter and I, we both play bass guitar as well as some other instruments.
the bass, man.
Oh, yeah. So it is as expected with that fact in mind. We will be a lot more knowledgeable maybe on some of the bass shit we talk about. So, that's just how it goes here,
Be like that, boy. Well, we play everything, but bass is number one.
Oh, 100%. So, with that being said, as you've probably read from the title at this point, the first episode that we'll be doing is on Alice in Chains.
Oh, yes.
So, that being said, get out your fucking tissues, because as we were doing research for this, I did not think I could get so goddamn depressed just researching a band.
Oh, yeah.
Like, as a lot of people may already know, there is a lot of drug use in this band. And
Madeline.
before we really get into Alice in Chains itself, let's move back a little further and talk about the music scene that Alice in Chains comes from. So, for those who may not know, Alice in Chains is referred to a genre that is grunge rock. What is grunge rock, you may ask? Grunge rock, according to Wikipedia, is sometimes referred to as the Seattle sound, as an alternative rock genre and subculture that emerged during the mid-1980s in the American Pacific Northwest state of Washington, particularly in Seattle and nearby towns. Grunge fuses elements of both punk rock and heavy metal.
And flannel.
Oh, of course. Oh, there is a whole lot of flannel and with horns wide open.
Her horror.
Oh, yes, my name is Scott Sapp, and I like the band Creed.
We are a lot of that kind of vocal style.
Oh, very
Not so-
fucking much.
Not so much in this band, though.
I know. I disagree, actually. The more and more, I never really noticed it at first, and like kind of keeping that in mind, like as I listened to Alice in Chains, like very heavily these last few weeks as we were preparing for this episode, Lane Staley very much does it as well. He has a very unique voice. Lane Staley being the vocalist of
Right.
Alice in Chains, of course, but
He doesn't rely on it though.
he doesn't rely on it, but because that's one of the main things I think that is like one of the biggest telltale signs of like, am I listening to grunge right now? Listen to the vocals. If her horries talk like this, and like the ors are like really, really pronounced. Like the vocal style is one of the first things that I feel is the most notable about grunge rock. Or like they're just screaming into the
Absolutely.
mic with no technique. Nirvana, I'm looking at you. But
Love you, Dave Grohl.
oh, Dave Grohl, what a peach. Even Chris Novoselic. But obviously,
A mean bass.
oh yeah, dude. Fucking but that's the thing. Like with grunge in general, like new metal, another genre that we will eventually kind of get into with some bands in the future. The 90s were definitely the birth of what nowadays is the music that we make fun of a lot, because both new metal and grunge are kind of now kind of looked at as like the black stain of the 90s when it comes to pop culture for a lot of people. A lot of the reason being with most music in general, a lot of the future generations, usually about like 15 to 20 years after any music genre comes up, as well as a lot of the music groups that come out at the time, that is around the time that we start dogging hardcore in a lot of those bands like Creed, fucking Nirvana, Pearl Jam. Those are like three notable grunge bands that at the time were at the like literally topping the fucking charts, but nowadays are considered some of the worst music ever written just because we're now at that age where it's no longer cool to listen to that shit.
Well, yes and no.
I mean, obviously, this is going to depend on who you talk to. But
I mean, it's not like all their music. It's like, the hits.
oh well, of
Like
course.
the edgy hits that were popular at the time. I mean, there's grunge bands that, their deep catalog, they have some pretty cool, like obscure sounding cool shit. Soundgarden especially is a example.
Oh, definitely.
And going back to the grunge topic in Alice in Chains, how you're saying Lane does the her, but he doesn't, and he doesn't rely on it. So, and also the double vocal harmony is so important to Alice in Chains, because
Oh yeah,
it's got such a dark sound compared to everything else that was on the market at the time. It sounded so different.
oh, definitely. And that's very much due to both the harmonies of both Lane Staley and the guitarist for Alice in Chains, Jerry Cantrell. Like
Yes,
those
sir.
two together as a double vocal duo, like you could not, like, I name a better duo. I will wait. There is no one in my mind that you can name as a better vocal duo as those two.
What about Sonny and Cher, dude?
Dude, fuck them. Not my problem, and I'm not going to worry about them because they're not the two lovely boys that we named.
No, that's a good point, because I mean it's some of the most original sounding and recognizable vocals that I've heard. I mean, when you hear the Alice in Chains vocals, you know who it is immediately.
100%. And a lot of this is more specifically when Lane was still in the band. This would be literally just the 90s.
I mean, even like, Check My Brain, that's a pretty dark sounding vocal combination with William too, but
Oh, yeah.
but it's mostly Lane that gave it Lane and Jerry that gave it the dark sound. That was the sound of Alice in Chains.
The best way to really describe the sound of Alice in Chains before you even have an idea of what they sound like is like pretty much one of my buddies described them as what heroin sounds like. If heroin had a sound, it would be Alice in Chains as a band.
Adeline Rock.
And like that was one of the main. Heroin is a very, very big contributor to the mood of the Seattle music scene that pretty much created grunge. Was a lot of these musicians, obviously not all of them, as a lot of stereotypes may suggest, but a good majority of a lot of those big bands and even some of the smaller ones that might be not as well known, they had a lot of issues with drug addictions, particularly with heroin, which was kind of one of the big drugs at the time.
Well, I mean, dude, it's always raining in Seattle. Wouldn't you fucking want to do heroin too?
I mean, this is kind of true, I guess. I mean, it's all about
It'd
the
be so
difference of
damn
where
depressing.
you live. No, 100%. I mean, heroin too has always been, I think, one of the most rampant drugs throughout history as well. Because, like, I didn't even really know. I think I learned a lot about heroin just from researching Alice in Chains, as sad as it is. And, like, it has been, like, a very long-lasting existing drug throughout history.
Well, yeah, I mean, even before grunge, like all the jazz cats, like that was their drug
yeah.
of choice too, is heroin. I mean, punk rockers, heroin. I mean, look at Led Zeppelin. I mean, even Jimmy Page, heroin. Motley Crue, Nikki Sixx,
Heroin.
notorious heroin user, one of the most notorious heroin users in music.
Exactly, dude. So, like, it's one of those things, like, generally speaking, music and drugs kind of go hand in hand. I mean, it's drug, sex, and rock and roll. There's a reason that's a saying. That doesn't come from nowhere.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll
Oh.
in that order.
Well, of course. I mean, sometimes, hey, man, some people like to change it up, get a little freaky,
And do drugs, sex, and rock and roll.
Hey, maybe. What if you just do them all as
I mean, let's be real here. Doing drugs before sex is way better than doing them after sex.
Well, it depends on your drug,
Well,
I mean, like, if you're
alcohol, you don't want to get whiskey dick or anything.
Well, exactly. So, like, that's like, you don't want to do that. If you smoke too many cigarettes, eventually your shit's not going to work either. You got ED from that. Heroin,
That I
I
did
would
not
imagine.
know. Interesting.
I mean, it's, you have to smoke a fucking lot of cigarettes for that. Well, anyway, we're getting a little
weed,
off
yeah,
topic
but-
here, but essentially, yes, this is kind of going to be, as if you couldn't tell by how much we're already talking about drugs, we're going to continue talking about drugs a lot for a good majority of this episode. So that being said, now that we've kind of gotten a lot of that out of the way, we could probably start with talking about the members themselves and how Alice in Chains actually came to be. So with that, really our main two guys that we're going to be focusing on for a good majority of our episodes are the duo that we mentioned earlier of Cantrell and Staley.
Jerry Cantrell also being the main songwriter of the band.
Yes. And he is essentially kind of the backbone of a lot of what Alice in Chains is. Without Jerry Cantrell, you have no Alice in Chains. There is no way that you have that.
100%.
And, like, obviously, a lot of people are probably going to may argue with me that, well, what about Lane Staley? Well, yes, he is a very important part.
Yes, without Jerry Cantrell, that's Mad Season.
Exactly, which we will get into them a little bit later. But
Of course.
of course. So, starting out with Lane. So, Lane Staley, he kind of grew up in a very religious family. And, like, so obviously, with that being said, very early on, he was kind of hidden from some stuff about, like, what real life is like. A lot of the darker sides of life that some kids may see pretty early on in life, but he was fairly sheltered in the very, very early stages of his life. But with that, he also was raised with a family that did listen to a fair amount of rock and roll as is, kind of bands like AC/DC, that type of stuff. Motley Crue, Van Halen, like these are some of the bands that Lane was able to listen to growing up once he got a little bit older. I mean, he even started in music pretty early on. Like, apparently his parents had put him in a music class for, like, toddlers pretty much. At 3 years old, he was in, like, one of those rhythm band things where it's like, whatever, a fucking teacher sings or puts on music and the kids are just sitting there tapping out a rhythm, pretty much just getting them used to being able to be on time, all playing at the same time.
Which, I mean, to this day, still for me being at this moment 24 years old, that is still a hell of a lot of fun.
Oh, 100%. And that's the thing. Like,
That'd be a great class.
I can speak for both me and Hunter when I say when we were exposed to music for the first time, it was like love at first sight with that shit.
Oh, absolutely.
So, like, kind of going off of that, like, yeah, I mean, Lane Staley obviously was able to get that pretty early on in his life, and like
Makes a big impact.
Oh yeah, exactly. And like pretty much once Lane got a little bit older, roughly the time that he was 12 years old, he actually got into playing drums himself. And like, which is kind of cool to see too that like a lot of musicians, even outside of just Lane himself, they start a lot of times on other instruments than what they end up being known for once they get
Right.
into a band that's actually pretty famous. Obviously, Lane Staley being an
Lane-
example of
yeah,
that.
and we got like Solly Lerner from Godsmack, who was the drummer,
Oh yeah,
and now he's been the singer since they've been famous. But
which is kind of ironic because they also have the song Godsmack by Alice in Chains that Godsmack themselves as the band actually named their band after, being Alice in Chains fans themselves.
So it's kind of a cool coincidence in that sense.
Yeah,
Drummer
dude.
turned singer.
Yep, and the next band literally got inspired by them, did the same fucking thing.
Very awesome fun fact there, buddy. But yeah, it's just super cool how that works. Like, and starting on drums is great because it gives you a good sense of rhythm from the beginning.
I would say drums are one of the most important for just being able to stay on time and kind of have a better idea of what it's like to kind of be the backbone of the band,
Right.
which kind of gives you a more unique perspective because playing any instrument in a band, obviously, yes, if you just focus on that one instrument, you're going to be fucking killer at that probably if you just keep at it. But also at the same time, on the other side of that coin, you also are going to be able to know, you're going to be able to play your instrument maybe even better and complement the people you play with if you learn other instruments.
Right. And for example, the reason why I picked up the guitar being a bass player is when you're jamming with a guitar player and you're looking at what they're playing, you can just look at their hand and you can be like, oh, that's a G, oh, that's a D minor, or, whatever. So it helps in that aspect too.
Well, honestly, and that's like even for me, kind of for the bass guitar itself, it's like for that, it actually is both a rhythm instrument with the drums as well as you can use it as a lead with guitar. So it's like it kind of bridged the gap between those, which is why
which Larry
love it.
Graham expressed
Exactly.
very well.
Oh,
But-
very much so.
But back to Alice in Chains.
Yeah. So around 12, that is kind of when Lane was starting to get into music himself and actually playing.
It's very relatable topic,
which-
this is.
Another thing that kind of influenced him as well was around that same age is when he first saw a magazine that had a rock star doing coke with a bunch of hot chicks under his arm and shit. And like that for him really
Is
ins-
super cool.
Well, it's super fucking cool for a kid because I could tell you the same thing. If I were to have saw that around the same age, I would have saw that and been like, I want to do that. And even the music itself did that for me. But that was the thing.
I want to snort coke off that hooker's ass.
Well, funny you say that because Lane Staley thought the exact same fucking thing. That was
Yeah.
his thing because obviously being a rock star for him, he already liked music to begin with, so that was already a starter. Seeing that magazine cover for him was like, holy shit.
dude, these guys are living the life now.
That was
man.
kind of his introduction to what it was like to be a rock star. And for him and his personality of kind of being a all over the place crazy kid, it spoke to him more than anything else, which, as we've said, will inspire him in more than just music itself.
Oh, absolutely.
His drug use is very much based off of this as well. And around this time, because of that as well, he always pretty much described himself as being a balls to the wall person when it came to if he did anything, he did it to the full extreme.
Oh, yeah.
Drugs, music, just doing even just crazy stupid stunt shit. Like that was the kind of person that Lane Staley was. But he was
Reminds me
always
of
a
a guy
very,
I know.
but that was the thing. Like he was always like a very fun, happy person. Like he's the kind of guy you want to be around. He's the one who's bringing good vibes and energy wherever you're at.
Right.
On top of that, he's probably the most entertaining guy you could hang out with just because of his personality.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And with that, that's kind of around the age that he also now started abusing some substances. Not necessarily getting too crazy out of control at first.
Not necessarily heroin.
Not yet, but he did start with smoking and drinking, I would imagine both cigarettes and pot, as well as drinking alcohol pretty much around his early
Hell
teens,
yeah.
as
Hell yeah.
probably a lot of kids do, whether they admit it or not. And for him, that was like kind of him getting into that rock star life. So kind of going off of that now, we can kind of now talk about Jerry Cantrell. So for him, his introduction to music was his family.
Right.
Living with
his family were all musicians.
100% they were. They were great fucking musicians
Oh,
too.
yeah.
His mom was a piano player. And I believe it was his mom's boyfriend who also first let him play the guitar. because pretty much around, like his family always had music surrounding him. He was always listening to music, and eventually he got to the point when he was fairly young where his mom's boyfriend let him play his guitar and play along with his mom.
In that Gibson Icons interview, he says, he let him play the guitar and taught him a couple chords, and he picked it up pretty quick.
Oh yeah, and
he
like
said, "Is this kid a guitar player?" No. Well, you should look into getting him a guitar.
And with that being said, speaking of that interview, we can actually play a clip of that right now where he kind of talks about him getting into guitar and kind of playing and all that.
Yeah.
Starting now.
I remember when I was in eighth grade, I went to live with my father, and he was stationed in Pennsylvania, and my brother and I moved out to Pennsylvania with him. And by that time, I was heavily into rock, like AC/DC and Kiss, and all the English metal, Zeppelin, and kids make the list, the Christmas list of what you want for Christmas, and I cut out a picture of a Les Paul and I put it on my door, and I wrote above it, "This is all I want." I remember that. About a week or two before Christmas or whatever, you start seeing presents accumulate under the tree or whatever, and I saw a case under there, a kind of a wide bottom and then a triangular case, and I'm like, fuck, I got a fucking guitar. He got it for me. And I remember Christmas came and I opened it up and it was an acoustic guitar, and I was so bummed. I was the shitty kid that was totally pissed off that I didn't get the electric, and my dad was so mad because he bought me a guitar because I wanted one, and I'm like I wanted a Les Paul, and he's like, "You get fucking good on that thing and I'll buy you a Les Paul, but learn how to play that first." So I did the same thing with that guitar that I did with the guitar that my mother bought me. I messed around on it for, a couple of months, and then it just went in the closet. It just didn't hold my attention. I wanted an electric guitar.
So yeah, I mean,
So we can summarize that too. His first electric guitar was some kind of off-brand bastardized Mustang, as he says.
oh yeah, definitely. And like it's kind of funny to always hear a lot of musicians talking about their first like guitars and stuff. Like I
'Cause
remember
it makes you think about yours too.
Oh yeah, because I mean, my first bass was some cheap Chinese knockoff brand that I'd never heard of, and I don't actually think exists, but I had one, and that
Yeah.
whatever starts you off is whatever starts you off. I'd much rather have that than nothing.
Oh yeah. But I can see where he's coming from. He didn't want to play a acoustic guitar. That wasn't what he was into.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the thing too. If my parents had gotten me an acoustic anything, I would have been like, "What the fuck is this?" But they didn't, so we didn't have that awkward altercation.
I see where he's coming from, but at the same time, it's like you just mentioned like Zeppelin and shit like that. Like they have great acoustic pieces that you could learn.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It's not like it's a lame instrument. There's so many great songs that you were listening to that you could learn acoustic on.
And the way that I can actually kind of see where he's coming from on that is like the fact that when you're thinking of like, well, what was the thing that inspired you? Are you going to think of the soft acoustic ballads that Led Zeppelin wrote? Or
No,
are you
and that-
thinking like the most hard rockin' part of the
Right,
songs
you're gonna
with the
think
electric?
like the ocean, like bam, 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 instead of like ramble on, stuff like that.
Oh, exactly.
Like I mean, you're gonna want to learn the ocean over ramble on, obviously.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But the more you mature, the more you realize. But as a kid, you don't realize that. You want to play what you want to play.
Yep, exactly.
You don't care about the other stuff.
Right. Well, kind of now going into like how they were able to incorporate them playing their instruments. Going into 1984, Lane Staley joined a glam metal band called Sleaze, spelled
Yes.
Sleze. Not really sure if they just misspelt it on purpose or if someone made an accident and been like, we're sticking with that because I don't want to admit that I don't know how to spell.
Well, he's pretty young too.
I mean, yeah, because like, and Sleaze was pretty much just kind of like a cover band at the time. I mean, and after a while, they actually ended up changing their name to Alice in Chains. But
it was just
and yeah, kind of like Guns N' Roses,
Guns N' Roses, Alice in Chains instead of Alice in Chains.
which at this time as well, Lane Staley was not playing with any of the current members of the Alice in Chains that we all have come to love and know. A lot of the band songs that they were playing were like Motley Crue songs because Lane Staley could keep up with a lot of Vince Neil's vocals, like a lot of that really high stuff.
He had the great range in his voice.
Oh yeah, and like, but he also had a lot of the grit to play some even lower stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Because after a while, Lane's first band, Alice in Chains, used to also eventually, they would transition into kind of more of like a metal sound once they changed their name as well.
Right.
And like they kind of were starting to even do some like Slayer covers. Like they were even doing like thrash metal type crap. And they even did have some original stuff, but for the most part, they were still playing a lot of covers.
I would love to hear a recording of Lane singing Slayer.
Honestly, so would I, which he has the range for. Because if you think like fucking Angel of Death for Tom Araya does like the but he also has a lot of the gruffness in his voice. Like he's got the gruffness in his voice to also be able to do a lot of that shit too.
Yeah, I mean Lane was. I mean that's like one of his defining features of his voice is that rasp. He had such a unique raspiness to his voice.
Yeah, dude, and like a lot of the original stuff that they wrote, which you'll probably like this fact, when they were still that Alice in Chains, they would do joke metal. They were trying to be something like what Steel Panther eventually came to be. Because like it was for them, they were kind of just looking to be more funny and jokey with it. I mean, they're still a bunch of young kids. They're not really taking anything too serious. There's not really a music scene in that Seattle area at the time for them to associate with as much, you know?
Right.
But
which I think is pretty cool because I love comedy music.
oh, same. And like
But,
honestly, for him too, like it's kind of cool to see even how he started out, you know, because like when I look back at a lot of the bands that I was in my younger years around that same age, like we never did shit. I don't think I ever had a band that wrote a full song. Like
I did, but the songs were not great.
yeah, you know.
But you know what? We wrote them, so whatever.
Well, I mean, that's one of those things you got to start fucking somewhere.
And I was just gonna say you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know, it's all a learning experience.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, if it wasn't for all those bands that I did that didn't really do anything, it's like I wouldn't have eventually been able to be fed up and angry enough to be like, okay, I'm fucking done playing around. I want something fucking serious.
Right.
Which I would imagine for Lane Staley was probably a lot of the same thing because
Right. And then he found people that were serious. And it as we all know, it worked out.
it did. And pretty much the way that a lot of this came to be was during an Alice in Chains show. Jerry Cantrell happened to be attending in the crowd as a concert goer and ended up meeting Lane Staley at the time. Because Jerry Cantrell had just been kicked out, actually, of his house and was looking for a place to stay. And apparently him and Lane ended up catching up with each other and, like, talking out a little bit. And Lane actually invited him to stay at the practice space that Alice in Chains actually played in. So, like, that's kind of weird to think that something as small and mundane as, like, they met at a concert.
Right.
Just was, like, that's how Alice in Chains the
Boom.
actual big band
It shows
eventually
you
came
how
to be.
fast history can be made.
Exactly. And throughout this time of Jerry Cantrell kind of living there as well, they were eventually kind of just things were not working out with Lane Staley's band, Alice in Chains. So after a little bit, their band actually ended up breaking up. But not too long after that, Lane actually ended up forming another band. I don't really think I actually was able to find a name of this band, but they were kind of more of like a funk band, like funk rock band. Maybe I would imagine probably closer to like Red Hot Chili Peppers type stuff. You never know. But essentially, they were looking for a guitarist. So Lane Staley had asked Jerry Cantrell if he would want to actually play in that band because they were obviously looking for somebody. And Jerry's only ultimatum to Lane was that he join Jerry's band. Jerry's band had two members at the time, being Alice in Chains drummer Sean Kenny and bassist Mike Starr, which would eventually become the lineup of the Alice in Chains that we know. Lane at the time was kind of hesitant, was like, I don't know, man, I don't know. And for a while, he didn't really kind of do anything with them, but he was still staying at his space. They were Jerry's band was starting to practice there. They didn't really have a name at the time either. And pretty much at this point, what Jerry wanted was for Lane to be in the band. Like I remember hearing in an interview that I had listened to that he was pretty much talking about like, once I had heard Lane's vocals, I knew that was the guy that I wanted to make music with. He pretty much considered Lane to be his voice. Like he wanted to write lyrics for Lane to be able to do on his own songs.
Right.
Jerry very much knew from that moment, I am destined to be in a band with this guy.
Right. And shit, it all worked out, you know, and then Lane really did become Jerry's voice.
Yep, exactly. And the way that actually, it's kind of a funny story too, how Lane came to join that band. Pretty much what they had done was they were like, well, we know we want Lane, but he's not really giving us an answer. He doesn't really want to join the band. So what they did was they would go out and find some of the worst singers they could possibly find and hold auditions in the practice space that Lane was sharing with Jerry. And every day that Lane was there, they'd have these people come in and just obliterate anything they would do to the point where it was like ear-gratingly bad. And like the last person they ended up getting was just this male prostitute that they found, literally like dressed in drag and everything. And like he was apparently so bad to the point where fucking Lane came in from the other room listening to this. He's like, okay, screw this. I'm just going to join the band. Like he was just so frustrated that they wouldn't
take
find
it anymore.
He couldn't take the idea of them going with someone so fucking horrific. And that was how he joined the band. And eventually they adopted the name Alice in Chains.
Yeah.
Which also kind of fun fact as well. Lane's mother actually stopped talking to him for 3 weeks when she found out the name of the band because she was so upset apparently by it. She claimed it was because of the bondage reference and that's all women would think and no one woman would listen to the band. And she was fucking pissed about it because she's crazy religious.
Well, we found out how wrong she was.
Well, also keep in mind too, this is around the time of like Tipper Gore. This is like the peak of a lot of parents demonizing a lot of these bands who were obviously just writing a lot of this stuff for the theatrics of it. None of them really believed in a lot of the shit that they were writing. I mean, it's no different than a horror movie or a fictional fucking horror book, you know?
Right. And D. Snyder gave a great testimony about that.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Which actually, another thing I almost forgot to mention, when Lane was still in his very first band, that Alice in Chains, they actually were able to get on a local access show where they were talking to local musicians, protesting a lot of the backlash on like censorship and all of that shit. So like there's actually a recording of Lane speaking out kind of like Dee Snider almost did, but obviously on a more public forum in his area, but literally was talking out about it, talking about how he's like, you shouldn't be able to censor what I'm talking about.
Right.
Like this is just flat out wrong.
Yeah. Freedom of speech, baby.
Freedom of speech, First Amendment. Do not censor art. Art is meant to challenge the mind and provoke thought to make change in society.
Yes.
And musicians, for a lot of them, know this to be very true. And a lot of them, that's one of the things that they're passionate about is their message on top of the music as well.
Exactly.
So taking that away is you're just fucking ruining art. So like Lane very much knew that right off the bat and was very outspoken from day one about it.
Yeah. I mean, which, you know, it's pretty obvious. I mean, just because you don't like something doesn't mean it can't be enjoyed by anybody else.
Well, exactly.
And that's what that proves.
Yeah.
Art proves that it, like you said, challenges the mind. It also challenges societal views.
Which art always should. That's how we progress.
Except, you know, with modern art now, it's just a money laundering scheme. But
Well, the internet has done some negative things to art, but it also has enhanced it in other ways. So that is an episode we may even have an episode talking about that in full. So when we get there,
culture.
maybe y'all can get angry with us or at us for whatever opinions we may hold on a lot of this. But
We will accept either opinion.
hey, man, good or bad, give me your opinions. Anybody who may be listening at any point in time, please comment, yell at me. If you think I said something incorrect or you just disagree with an opinion, let me hear it. 100%, I would love to.
Absolutely. I want to hear it too.
Yeah, so kind of also now kind of moving on from that, now that we're getting into actual Alice in Chains themselves, right around the time of 1988, Alice in Chains is now actually getting together, writing music, and this is actually when they kind of wrote their first demos that are known as the Treehouse tapes. Supposedly, somewhere out there, I have not been able to find them, but you should possibly be able to find copies of this somewhere. I know there's physical copies that still exist somewhere. I hope someone's uploaded them to the internet. If we do not find them at any given point in time, someone please send that over my way.
If
Or
not,
Hunter.
if not, we will be starting a GoFundMe for finding these tapes and uploading them to the internet.
Yeah, I would love to, honestly. That is something I would love to give back that way. And pretty much from this point, this is kind of what actually ended up getting them some notoriety. This is what got them the fucking like record deal that eventually got them to start on the path that they eventually got to, you know? So after 1988, when this happened, in 1989, they were able to actually strike a record deal with Columbia Records,
Columbia.
which especially at that time was a pretty big label to be added to, especially.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Well, also not really having anything other than the Treehouse tape demos, like that's pretty fucking insane, dude.
Oh yeah.
Like I could not imagine if like Capitol Records were to hit up any band I might be in the near future, being like, "Yo, you want a record deal? Fuck yeah, I do."
How many new basses can I buy with that?
Yeah, exactly, dude.
How much equipment can I buy?
Which even kind of going off of that when it comes to record deals and stuff, and like it's kind of weird looking back and seeing like the difference of how bands were signed back then versus how a lot of the music industry works nowadays, where it's like the internet has
The internet is the ruler, dude.
well, the internet is
today.
the ruler, but also it has destroyed the ability to stand out amongst a crowd, you know, where like the
Yeah.
internet makes it
Well,
it's because of the oversaturation of everything.
right. I was gonna say it's oversaturated, but still, like you will reach some people. But like, yeah, like back in the day, it was a lot harder to get your name out there.
Oh,
You
definitely.
needed a company backing you. Now today, you can just
Well, yeah, a lot of bands
throw
use-
some shit on YouTube and see what happens.
well,
you know?
you'll also see a lot of musical artists going independent, not even going through a label, finding out how to find those loopholes to get where they need to be. And you probably won't even see a lot of bands or artists nowadays getting signed until like 2-3 albums in. Alice in Chains didn't have anything released, and they had already pretty much gotten a record deal with fucking Columbia.
Right.
Which to me, I look at that and see that is cool as hell.
Yeah, that's cool as shit, dude.
100%. So
I
now
mean, you and I both have albums out, and we haven't got a record deal.
right, no, exactly, because like I've already been in a band that's already had 2 releases out, an EP and an album, and I mean, yeah, we did that all by ourselves,
Yeah.
paid for everything, promoted it ourselves, everything. I mean, didn't do all that well, but
Hey, I listened to it.
hey, man, and I listened to yours as well when we were back in high school.
Yeah,
so.
those the high school days. I mean, you know, like I said, it wasn't the best, but you know what? We did it.
I mean, exactly. A lot of other people can't say it.
Yeah,
so
you-
definitely.
where's
happy
your
to-
album, bitch?
Exactly, dude. Well, speaking of albums and releasing, and now that we've gotten to the awaited first release of Alice in Chains. So, in 1990, Alice in Chains dropped their debut album, Facelift.
What a banger of an album, too.
Oh, yeah, to start out on
Absolutely
that.
killer record. I mean, think about it. Their first album, they already had a hit, "Man in the Box."
Yeah, man.
That's still one of their most famous songs, and it was on their first record.
Well, that and then
As of right now, 280 million, almost 281 million plays on Spotify.
that is insane
That's
to think.
Spotify alone.
Well, that and then you also have "Bleed the Freak," which is one of the other amazing singles off
Right.
of that. "We Die Young" as well. Like,
Yeah.
honestly, for me, so kind of now getting into this album, right? So for me, my first impressions of this album, mind you, this was not the first album that I had listened to by them. I think
No, Dirt was my first.
Yep,
album.
same here. Dirt, which
Yeah.
is the second album, which we'll get to
Which
in a
for
little
most
bit.
people it is.
I mean, it's-
except Man in the Box.
Oh,
mean,
yeah,
most
Man in
people
the
already
Box-
know that song.
I
but
think "Man in the Box" actually might have been the first song I had heard, just like on the radio as a little
it
kid.
definitely was the first song I had ever heard.
And,
by
like-
Alice in Chains.
So it's kind of weird, actually. So with "Man in the Box" in particular, I have a very, very vivid memory of it was anything generally speaking that had a talk box made me think of it for no. I don't like. I could not tell you why.
Well,
at
it's
all.
one of the most iconic talk box songs ever.
Well, for some reason, whenever I heard any talk boxes, particularly "Man in a Box," made me think of grilled cheeses. Grilled cheese sandwiches.
Grilled cheese sandwiches.
I literally have no idea where the connection was made. Whenever I heard this song come on, specifically the wow, 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 literally I would think of grilled cheese
The
sandwiches.
sexual nature of the talk box turned you on to grilled cheese.
Maybe grilled cheese might be a kink I haven't discovered yet. I'll have to
Gonna
update
have-
y'all on episode 2
Gonna
about
have to
that
fuck
one.
a grilled cheese, I guess.
I'm gonna make a grilled cheese when we're done recording
for,
this.
for the sake of the experiment, I will do it too.
You got to make sure it cools down a little bit though, because like
No,
you don't
no.
want to go into that just the moment it's off the fucking
See,
skittle.
you want to cool it off by flapping your dick on it. All right, we're
You got to spread the butter on the pan with your dick.
Spread the.
As much dick work as you can do for both cooking and then using this like a flashlight. That's what you want to do.
Yeah, you gotta find a balance. You're not gonna get it the first time. Trust me, but you will eventually get it.
Yeah, it'll kind of be the same action as like when you burn your tongue with hot food. You don't want that burn anywhere else on your body. Not even your tongue, but you definitely don't want it down below.
Right.
But
So the talk box always makes me think of Peter Frampton, though.
okay, you'd see
Which-
very
which-
different mind thoughts here. We think very similarly, but also very
fucking-
differently in other ways.
Fucking talk box makes me think of grilled cheese as something I never thought I'd hear in my life.
Looking back on it, it still makes no damn sense to me why that was the thing it made me think of. It did.
I have things like that too.
4 years
I
old,
totally
mind
get
you.
it.
So I'm also very not coherent mindset going on there, but that was the connection my brain made for no reason. I like grilled cheese sandwiches. I like Alice in Chains.
Chad was just heard the zoo by, was that the Scorpions? They sing the zoo.
I would not know. I don't like that.
It's got the talk box in it, so Chad's just listening to the zoo and just it's like, man, I could go for a craft single between
Oh.
two deliciously grilled slices of bread.
Hey man, I could use one right now. Fucking some tomato soup and a grilled cheese and some Alice in
Oh,
Chains.
dude.
That's
Oh,
a day
dude.
right there.
Fuck yeah.
Well, that being said, that song in particular, even with my fond grilled cheese memory, has come to be one of my least favorite Alice in Chains songs of the Lane era, being from pretty much any of the music they released in the 90s.
What, Man in the Box?
Yeah, and it's kind of the
Is
reason.
it your oversaturation of it?
Yes, and that's kind of one of those things where you will probably hear a lot of my dumb opinions on songs I don't like anymore.
I mean, but that's okay because I have dumb opinions like that too, just because I've heard them too much. It's not that they're bad songs, it's just I've heard them too much and don't care to hear it again.
And another small reason as well, and this has a lot to do with just the music industry and what people automatically listen for when we're listening to songs. If you will notice as we kind of go through this, a lot of Alice in Chains and a lot of other bands' most popular songs, the ones that are usually your singles, are going to be the more uplifting, almost happier sounding songs, which for Alice in Chains There's not much of that.
Right. But I mean, but that makes sense, because the radio play. They don't
Yeah.
want to depress people. They want to make people, enjoy the radio.
Yeah, exactly. Be like that's the last song they listen to before they turn it off because they're so depressed. It's like, no, you
or
want them
before they get into a car accident and die.
right, exactly, dude. So like it's one of those things of like a lot of the more upbeat songs in general, like I preferred my music to be a little bit darker when like because that's the thing too. When it comes to listening to Alice in Chains, I'm going to that band for the dark nature of that sound. Like they are known for sounding very dark.
And Alice in Chains, yeah, specifically is a very dark sounding band, which I like dark sounding music like Black Sabbath, that kind of thing. Alice in Chains is like the Black Sabbath of the grunge world because of that
100%.
dark sound.
Oh, definitely. And that's the thing. Like with Man in the Box in my opinion, is probably the most upbeat song on the album. If one of them at least.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know. Sea of Sorrow is pretty upbeat.
Yeah, right. I mean, for me, a lot of the songs that really stand out to me are honestly some of the less known ones.
Yeah, I agree.
Like for me, Bleed the Freak, I would say is probably one of the more popular ones that I would say is a highlight.
Still a very good song.
That one, Love, Hate, Love is also a phenomenal song, which for those who want to see the immense range that Lane Staley's vocals have, Love, Hate, Love is a prime example of him belting out high shit and also having very low kind of like more raspy type shit as well.
Yeah, absolutely amazing vocal work.
Oh, definitely. I mean, throughout his entire career. And
I
then,
mean, for a debut album, Facelift is a banger.
oh, yes.
It's amazing. It left such an impact
A lot
on the music scene with just one release already.
Oh yeah, no, and this was one of this album also charted on the top 200 of music around this time as well. So
Yeah,
with this
and-
being their first release as well, keep in mind this was not a small release by any means. Columbia Records pushed this album and that band to the stratosphere from the get-go.
Oh yeah. Well, they have immense talent, and it makes sense. So it was August 21st, 1990.
Yes.
So, and now it wouldn't be another just under 2 years until their next release.
Yep, yeah. So pretty much kind of going off of that now. With that album coming out, they obviously had gotten crazy fucking popularity. And also to kind of keep up the usual theme of this episode, a lot of the drug use really at this time wasn't too rampant yet at this point. I mean, Lane probably at this point was probably doing some cocaine at this point.
Yeah, I'm sure. To
Co-
keep up with the rigorous touring schedule, especially.
Well, yeah, and that was the thing. Like, and Lane had even said in an interview about how like one of his main goals when it came to being in a band was doing cocaine for the first time off of his first gold record. And with Facelift, he was able to achieve that goal. Like
Yeah.
this album did so well. They got a gold record as a result of this, and he did cocaine for the first time off of that gold record, as he promised himself that he would do for so many years.
Right.
And
Just like seeing him snorting coke off that hooker's butt on that magazine.
well, now he's snorting that coke right off the butt of the music industry being his gold record. That's
Damn
one
right.
nice cheek to smoke it off of.
Hell yeah, man.
Hell yeah, dude. Well, kind of going into that 2-year period between records, pretty much this is around the time that Alice in Chains actually got onto their first big tour. They toured for those 2 years with Iggy Pop, Van Halen, and Poison. Pretty fucking big names. That's nothing small.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, Iggy being one of the forefronts of punk, Van Halen, being one of the pioneers. I mean, this is probably with Sammy Hagar at this point, I'd assume.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because this
Which
was
fight me. I love Sammy Hagar, Van Halen. Fight me.
they pretty much, yeah, because they started touring in 1990. So
Yeah.
I'm not really too familiar with Van Halen and when. I mean, I know some of their big stuff. I didn't know. I'm not sure when Hagar was there and all that junk. But
Well, I think 1984 was David Lee Roth's last album with the band.
okay. Oh wow, yeah. Okay, so it's definitely Hagar.
Yeah,
then.
so I was gonna say it's probably Sammy Hagar.
But yeah. So and then this is
But
also.
fight me.
I mean, hey, I might do it. I'll jump over this table any moment now. But this is also during this tour. This is when Lane Staley, and I don't know about the rest of the band. I would imagine probably a lot of them at the same time actually picked up heroin for the first time. And correct me if I'm wrong. Did Iggy Pop have drug issues in his past?
Probably.
I mean,
I
he's
feel
not.
like Iggy was a heroin user.
Yeah, well, I know he actually take it back. He did have drug issues. I don't know if heroin was one of them. So I guess, yeah, Hunter, you can look that up.
Yeah, Iggy Pop did do heroin, and he did check himself into rehab. Fun fact. And David Bowie was at his side the whole time.
No shit.
Fun fact, yeah.
Well, I guess with that fact in mind, I would not doubt that Lane might have even picked up his heroin addiction from Iggy himself, assuming he might have still been doing it at the time.
It's very popular. It's very possible.
So, I mean, that is something that we'll have to look into a little bit after this, as well as just kind of if anybody finds out and wants to let us know, I say do so.
Leave us a comment.
Yes, definitely. So, at this point, we are now coming up on album number 2. This is going to be literally the thing that shoots Alice in Chains into the stratosphere of popularity. With this album, which was in September 29th of 1992. Oh, shit. Before we get there, I'm going ahead of myself. Before they actually released that album, they actually released an EP.
baby.
Yep. So the SAP EP came out in February 4th of 1992. This release actually featured actually probably one of my favorite songs even by Alice in Chains. You Got Me Wrong.
Great song.
Great fucking song. But yes, so this is a 4-song EP that they released in early 1992 while they were pretty much waiting for the Sony, what would eventually become Sony, to actually sign them to a record deal to get them even further along in their career. So they released this, and while they were waiting for this even to get released officially, they were already in the middle of getting Dirt finished. Because even while they were touring for Facelift, they already had half of Dirt written.
Which would be basically their magnum opus.
Oh, 100%. So now that we kind of got the SAP, which actually, with SAP, we actually got some really cool fucking names on this album that actually featured vocally. One of which being Chris Cornell from the popular grunge band Soundgarden, as well as the vocalist of Mudhoney. So that's honestly pretty fucking cool.
And Joan Jett, I believe.
Yep. And the vocalist of Heart.
Oh yeah, that's right. It was Ann Wilson.
Yep, Ann Wilson from Heart. And and then Mark Arm from the band Mudhoney. They feature on a few songs on this EP, which is cool to see too that they're even collaborating this early on in Alice in Chains' career.
Right. I mean, shit, that's their second release.
Yeah. And like, this is honestly one of the ones I didn't even know this EP existed until we started doing research for this. I'd never heard of this EP before. So like, for me to see that and then also see the people they had,
I knew Got Me Wrong, but I didn't know it was their second actual release.
Right, yeah.
Well, their second official release, I should say.
Exactly. So I mean, kind of seeing that for me was pretty cool that there was even more Alice in Chains I had never heard yet.
Right.
And so kind of moving on to the album that we have been talking about a few times already here, Dirt. So of the same year, 1992, on September 29th, so quite a few months after, but still within the same year, they released their album Dirt, which would eventually top at number 1 on the US music charts.
Which makes sense because the album's awesome.
It is an amazing album front to fucking back.
Every song.
There is
banger.
and this is also single-handedly probably one of the most depressing albums musically and lyrically.
But it's so good.
Yes.
It is so good.
It is so fucking good. And like Lane,
it's very well written and thought out and just geniusly executed.
Oh, definitely. And like, with this being said, like, Lane's and pretty much a lot of the band's drug addictions to specifically heroin were starting to kind of already get out of hand. I mean, Lane had already been in and out of rehab a few times at this point already. And like for this, the album itself lyrically is pretty much a concept album about the idea of using drugs to deal with a lot of your issues in life, just to find out that it is actually the thing that is now an ailment on your life. This
Right.
is the
It's
thing
now
that,
the thing that's causing your main issue.
exactly. So Alice in Chains has always been very upfront about a lot of their issues. They don't really hide who they are. And like, I mean, really, this is kind of one of those things where like, this is kind of the start of like, I would almost say the start of like emo type music and mindset, where it's like now you got a bunch of depressed ass kids listening to shit like this.
Right.
This is what they're kind of eating up, and like they're like, oh my God, someone actually sees what I mean. This is the shit that I'm dealing with, or like
Right.
people can relate to it.
Right.
And one thing that actually ended up kind of backfiring on Lane and Jerry for writing a lot of this stuff was they were writing it obviously to show the massive flaws and issues of drug use, not necessarily kind of
Glorified.
Yeah,
they weren't glorifying
They were
it
by
at all.
no means
And you could
glorifying
tell
any of
if
it.
you listen, if you read the lyrics, you can tell it's not glorified.
No, not at all. And Lane was kind of actually very upset and shaken and almost regretful of the choice of lyrics that they picked, because he would have fans come up to him and be like, dude, I'm fucking high right now, man. Like expecting Lane to be like, hell yeah, dude. But like, no, he's like, no, that's not what I wanted. I wanted you guys to not
Like,
do
dude,
fucking
no,
drugs.
this is the opposite of what I'm going for, man.
Well, that's the thing, because like it's sometimes it's you can never necessarily control sometimes how things are interpreted,
right.
but at the same time, and that's kind of like an argument that a lot of parents were trying to use for why that shit needed to be censored. When in reality, it's like you can't just erase history
No,
and like the
right.
way things are in life, or else nobody's gonna know the dangers and horrors of it if it's not in that pop culture shit.
If history is not learned, you are doomed to repeat it.
Goddamn right.
So, moving on to the textures of dirt, which, is considerably influential on not only the way I think of how music sounds, but how a lot of people do that are our age and listen to that kind of music. So, you got like the Rooster, it's got that awesome, just super nice, clean guitar part.
Yeah.
A lot of I don't know if exactly he was using this amp, but a lot of Jerry's clean tones come from a Vox AC30.
Ooh.
And of course a humbucker most of the time in a bridge position specifically.
Okay.
And so for most of the tones that Jerry would use on that record, it was he used a lot of Bogner amps, which you'll find is a reoccurring theme with Jerry Cantrell, is he loved his Bogner amps.
I actually can't even say I'm too familiar with that brand myself.
They're a little more boutique, but they've
Okay.
been around for a while.
Okay.
So he used a Bogner Fish and a Bogner Ecstasy. And then a really hilarious fact is he also used a fucking headphone amp for another texture.
Really?
Yeah, so for a lot of the top end, he used a Rockman X100 headphone amp. So something you'd practice just with like some shitty headphones,
I mean, yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, there's no limit to creativity. You don't need the most expensive, like out there shit just to get tones that you want.
Right. I mean, look at Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age. Used that little tiny PV amp
Yeah.
to get one of the most awesome overdriven guitar tones ever. It's like you don't need anything fancy.
No.
Like if it works, it fucking works.
100%.
And it was probably his GNL Rampage that he used. I mean, that's like his favorite series of guitars, the GNLs, which is Leo Fender was one of the founders of that company. But
Okay.
so single pickup, Kaler tremolo, Strat style body, headstock, just a workhorse.
100%.
Probably why Jerry loved him,
I mean,
and
and
his Les Pauls too. So
the way he fucking used any instrument that was put in his hands, fucking genius every time.
oh yeah, the guy is a gifted guitar player for sure.
100% he is. So kind of getting into Dirt itself now, going into the music, like fuck, dude, like just
Okay, starting with them bones though, that fucking awesome. What is it? Like 5/4 time signature?
I
that's in?
believe so.
Dude, that literally the first time I heard that, it was literally ingrained in my DNA that song just became like part of my musical identity because that riff and the way it's written is so awesome.
I literally can never get over, like, we can actually, I'll play a snippet of this real quick too. I don't know if we'll be able to put it in the episode, but at least me and Hunter can hear it real quick. Like, this is definitely where a lot of like the metal influence in Alice in Chains kind of comes through. Like, Them Bones is one of those songs where it's like, when you hear that, you're like, that's a metal song, right? But
Yeah.
like, that's the thing. Like, Alice in Chains has probably some of the heaviest and softest of any grunge band when it comes to their music.
And you know, when you first put this record in, you're just hit by a semi truck of this song.
Oh yeah,
And that chorus, the vocal harmony is awesome.
well, that's another song too that also shows Lane Staley's fucking like amazing vocal range because he's belting out during the song too.
Oh man, that chorus is just—it's one of my favorite Alice in Chains choruses. Is Them Bones.
And then with a perfect
It's
follow-up song to Them Bones, Damn That River, dude. Like,
Great.
oh my God.
Great, another great vocal song.
Yeah, and then like for me, couple other like pivotal points
Oh,
in this
man.
album, the song itself, Dirt, the actual title track of the album, is to me one of the most emotionally moving music pieces I think I've
yeah.
ever heard. Like,
It's fantastically put together.
and like songs like that, Junkhead, and Hate to Feel, like those are three songs for me that it's like you are actually feeling the raw emotion of these people.
Well, same with Rain When I Die. I mean, Lane's performance on that is just, when you hear it once, you remember it forever.
Exactly. Well, that's the thing. Like,
it's
you
so good.
you feel what they are feeling. It's such a very doom and gloom. Like, you feel like literally this is probably what a manic depressive feels like. Literally just the ultimate doom of life, like feeling like nothing will ever be good.
But
everything is just a downhill
Also,
spiral.
even not just Lane's vocal performance, but the musical performance, the dynamics.
Yes.
Like they have such emotion when they play, all of them.
Oh yeah,
And
dude.
just such a great band together. Another cool thing, Wood, obviously one of the most iconic bass intros of the time period, is like that bass track. There's like 7 tracks of bass on that. It's just layered and layered. Yeah, I mean,
No shit.
yeah. There's all kinds of bass tracks. There's even acoustic bass, which is a Kramer Farrington acoustic
Ooh.
bass, which is, it's a Kramer, so it's, it's kind of metal looking, but it's still an acoustic bass.
Right.
So it's just got this really chunky and just big, awesome bass sound. I mean, it's iconic.
Yeah, dude. I mean, like with that opening bass riff too, like
Through an
it's
Ampeg, dude. Oh,
which this is actually one of the songs too that I remember hearing and kind of like it made me actually start focusing on bass because like for a lot of my earlier life, I was always focused on everything but bass guitar. As far as I was concerned, there was no bassist in any band. Bass doesn't exist. I never listened for it, never
Right.
really noticed it.
Then
Wood
you-
was one of those songs that was like, holy
right.
shit.
And then you listen to like songs like Wood, For Whom the Bell Tolls, or any fucking Iron Maiden song under the sun. Like
Exactly.
it just turns you onto a different realm, And I think that's a good point. When you start playing an instrument, you hear the instrument a lot clearer. You know what to look for
Yes.
when you're listening.
And
So it adds a different perspective to listening to music, I think. which is super
unfortunately,
cool.
when it comes to bass in particular, it won't help you if you try to listen to Injustice for All by Metallica because the bass does not exist. Thank you, Lars
Thanks,
Ulrich.
Lars. I think we need like less bass on this song.
Can we
dude.
turn the drums up while we're
You know
at
what?
it?
You know what? Not just this song. How about the whole album? We just like, get rid of it. Even though Jason's playing, like a motherfucking alembic bass that costs more than a motherfucking house, dude. Okay. Okay. Back to Alice in Chains here.
But yeah, so like a lot of the mood on this album was very much doom and gloom. A lot of it attributed to a lot of the drug
Well,
use
well,
and just like general unstable environment in a lot of the lives of these musicians.
Well, the Rooster specifically, isn't that about Jerry Cantrell's father being in the
Vietnam War, I think.
Vietnam, yeah. And my God, when you kind of like dig into what that song really means, wow.
Oh yeah, dude.
Because you could listen to that song all day and like not really know what it means unless you like really look into the lyrics and kind of interpret it. You know, it's a very powerful song.
Yes, it is. And a kind of almost little key song. And like it's kind of almost an Easter egg, really. It is either referred to depending on where you're looking
Are you talking about that short little interlude piece?
Yep, it's in between Godsmack, which we made a mention of earlier in the episode, where the band Godsmack actually got their name from. It's in between the songs Godsmack and Hate to Feel. I believe maybe on some, depending if you get like original pressings, it might even just be only at the end of Godsmack, and then it just plays that at the end and goes right into Hate to Feel. But
I'm pretty sure on the CD it's not even listed as a track.
no, yeah, because it's
the
like
CD and the vinyl, it's not even listed as a track.
nope. And the Easter egg part of it is the fact that Tom Araya, the vocalist and bassist for Slayer, is on that little like interlude piece.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Which I mean, all he
it's-
does is scream "I am Iron Gland," so it's either going to be titled as Untitled or Iron Gland if it's even listed at all. But it is a cool little piece. Honestly, it is kind of just another throwback to like a more metal sound, and that's kind of another good spot where like their metal sound kind of just pulls through, even though he's like pretty much just playing the same note and then just like bending it pretty much on the string.
Isn't that what metal is?
Yeah, 100%. So I mean, it really just only solidifies that statement that much more.
So Alice in Chains was asked, "Does it gent?"
And it does, God damn it. So pretty much right after album got released, they fucking blew up, as I said earlier. And at this point, this is when they now go on tour. This tour was with Nirvana and Red Hot Chili Peppers when they kind of were going all around. Specifically, that tour, I believe, was in South America itself. And this is where some of the issues of Alice in Chains are now starting to show through, because during this tour, Mike Starr actually ended up ODing during one of their shows. I think it was backstage.
That's not possible because drugs are illegal.
Well, of course, yeah. Why would we be doing? Well, this is South America, though, actually, so we don't know what the laws are down there. Or at least I don't.
Yes.
But with that being said, yeah, Mike Starr, the bassist of Alice in Chains, OD'd on heroin and was narrowly revived by Lane Staley himself. And like, this was like a big, like, eye-opening experience as well. And I don't even really think this was the first time that he had OD'd, but like he'd done it on a tour.
And mind you, this is only two years into their career.
Yeah, pretty much.
So
no, I think this
well,
one
I mean,
is,
2 years into since their first album was released is what I meant to say.
Yeah. So yeah, this is
Two years since Facelift, which is their first release.
Yes. And like to think that within 2 years they're already having issues to that degree, it's like, well, fuck. Like, is this something that's sustainable? And like pretty much eventually so there are a few different things that I've heard depending on who you ask, and sometimes even the person you're asking gives different answers on the departure of Mike Starr, the bassist. He, a little bit after this OD, he was no longer in Alice in Chains within the year. There's a couple different reasons as to why, and we'll go over those now. If you ask the band, and particularly Lane Staley had said in an interview in 1994 that the reason why Mike Starr was no longer in the band was because he left on his own terms because of the fact that he was just getting too sick and tired of touring so much, like he needed a break. And that is pretty much the statement that was given from Alice in Chains at that point. I don't think they actually made an official statement, but essentially will say that Lane's interview will be that much. Mike Starr later in another interview actually disputed that fact, saying that he was actually kicked out of the band due to his rampant heroin use, saying that he was pretty much saying that he was kicked out for being a junkie. Which
is saying something.
Which, and when on top of that as well, they even, I believe it was Mike Starr, I could be wrong on this, but there was also another rumor that he was kicked out due to the fact that he was also scalping his
tickets,
he was scalping
man.
his own tickets to his own band. So obviously,
What a schlemiel.
well, that's the thing. I mean, assuming that any of that is true, it's like obviously the drug use is, but if he's scalping his own tickets, it's like it's pretty shitty and scummy to do, dude.
Probably trying to buy more heroin.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, when it comes to a heroin addiction, some people will do anything to get that next fix.
Heroin makes you a schlemiel, dude.
Heroin. So
Don't do heroin, kids.
this was in 1990. Actually, yeah, this was like end of 92, beginning in 93 that this the departure of Mike Starr happened. And here is where I got confused for the longest time.
For the longest time.
Time.
All right, now we're going to get sued by Billy Joel. Great.
Oh, damn it. So pretty much Alice in Chains wasted no fucking time finding a new bassist since they were still touring at the time.
Unless it took them less than a couple months
Yeah, so now
to find Mike Inez.
Mike Inez, the new bassist of Alice in Chains as of
Another
1993. So second Mike, also bassist
In a row.
also uses all the same exact fucking music gear.
Well, pretty damn close, at least. Like, so, Mike Starr was mainly a Spectre guy. And Mike Inez played Spectre, but he was mostly a Warwick guy.
Even in Alice in Chains,
the
though?
exact same amp. But here's the thing. Mike Starr used an SVT2. Mike Inez used an SVT2 Pro.
Oh.
So it was basically just the SVT2 with a graphic EQ.
Yes. Oh, nice. So
Also, I believe that's a solid state amp. I could be wrong.
a solid state is pretty dope. But for
agree,
me,
but tube's better.
where my confusion happened was I had no fucking idea that he was a different guy. I did not know they got a new bassist at any point in time. Like, I
their
thought
styles are very similar.
their styles are similar.
Very chunky and active.
Yes, and like, but
Woody.
I don't know, but the playing style itself, I noticed a pretty big difference.
Yeah, they have a different playing style for sure.
And like, one of the ways, and like for Mike Starr, like his is actually almost like he almost plays a little more smooth. He slides a lot.
He's a lot more melodic.
Yes,
of a bass player.
He's a lot more melodic, and he actually almost took a lot more lead parts than Mike Inez ever did while he was in Alice in Chains.
Well, I mean, think about Down in a Hole. Is that do 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 do? Like he's got those cool like little fills in there. It is Down in a Hole.
Yes,
He's got those like really cool little bass fills, and it's very dominant in the mix.
yeah.
Which I also liked Dirt for that reason. Is the bass, you can hear it a lot.
Yeah, a lot of Alice in Chains
But it's
is
not
earlier shit.
overly based. It's got a great mix.
100%.
Great mix.
Could not mess with it. And yeah, so like they look the fucking same to me when you don't like if you don't really know their faces all that well.
All you're seeing is a big blob of brown hair.
Yeah,
flying
they
around.
literally they both essentially just they have Marty Friedman hair, the guitarist of Megadeth. So
Yeah.
like with that, like I was a bit of confusion researching. I was like, they had two bassists.
So what album was the change? And that would bring us to Jar of Flies.
Jar of Flies. Well, before we even get that far, like a cool little side note too on Mike Inez, he actually used to be the bassist for Ozzy Osbourne during his solo career from
he did.
89 all the way up to 93, I believe it was.
Yeah, so he was basically up until he joined AC.
Yes.
Well, AIC. You want to get technical, but
Oh, yes.
But yeah, so with Mike Inez joining the band comes probably a little more touring.
I would imagine, yeah.
And well, because there's also almost a 2 year gap between Dirt and Jar of Flies, so there's obviously probably some tour time there. So January 25th brings us to 1994. Huge year for albums, by the way.
Oh,
But
crazy good year for albums.
But yeah, Jar of Flies, great record.
Yeah, so this,
I mean, Nutshell is the biggest hit on the album.
oh yeah, Nutshell
Great.
and then I Stay Away
Oh.
were the two biggest on that for sure.
No Excuses is a great song too.
Yes.
The whole album's great.
So, well, while we are calling this technically an album, it's kind of weird. It depends on who you talk to because some
Right,
people could call it an album.
I would say it's an album because it's 30 minutes long. I mean, there's like albums with like 15 or 20 songs that aren't even half an hour, but those are punk bands and shit like that. But,
Yes, because this,
I would consider it an album personally, but I could see why somebody would consider it an EP because it's only 7 songs.
yes. And so with anybody who may not be aware, we've said EP a few times now. Essentially,
Extended play.
Yes, essentially the difference between an EP and an LP. An EP is essentially it is a shorter album. Essentially, think of it as like an album cut in half. Usually, the way it's characterized is any musical release that's usually anywhere between 3 to 6 songs, usually under 30 minutes. And with this release, it has 7 songs breaking these.
And it's all just barely 31 minutes.
It is 30 minutes and 51 seconds.
Yeah, so it's almost 31 minutes.
So I
just
guess
breaking that threshold.
So I guess technically it is an album if we're going to really go hold that to a T on that definition.
I personally would. There's
then-
people that would disagree, but I would.
Yeah, so and then pretty much an LP being like a normal album, anything above 30 minutes over 6 songs.
Right.
But yeah, but with that's the thing. Like this also made this topped the charts. This was a #1 hit again. This whole release.
Yeah.
And for me as well, like this. So this is also another thing to note that it makes this album very notable. It's an acoustic album.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, there is some electric stuff. I do believe that was recorded for like lead stuff and solos, but like for the most part, almost everything on this album is acoustic.
Yeah. And it's great too. It just shows they don't need the big amps just to be good. I mean, Alice in Chains, they're a good band. It just shows in that way. A good guitar player is shown playing without distortion.
Yes. No, and that's the thing. Jerry Cantrell delivers fucking magically.
Oh yeah. Great performances from everybody in the band, really.
Yes. So with this release, like personally for me, with my first impressions of it, I did not like this album at all when I first actually had tried listening to it, because for me, my mindset was acoustic, ew. Because
acoustic, that's for nerds.
No, exactly. Like for me, like when I had listened to this album for the first time, I was pretty much in the middle of going through high school. Literally, my only reference of good music, in my opinion, was just whatever metal and death metal I was listening to at the time. So for me, going from that to acoustic, like I didn't really enjoy stuff that was more acoustic. I usually strayed away from that type of stuff. Obviously, I was fucking
mind, baby.
Open the mind, and I did thankfully eventually do that, and I do love this album to pieces now.
Yeah,
now
it's
that I'm
great.
older. And but yeah, no, I mean, like some of the songs that we mentioned, like you can't really go wrong. Like Nutshell in particular is probably one of the most probably one of the most popular songs that's enjoyed by people even outside of grunge, Alice in Chains, like rock fans even.
Right.
This is a song that a lot of people enjoyed outside of. This is like one of those albums that kind of helped bridge a gap between some genres that other people may not have originally come to this band to listen to, but this is an album that would do that, which is why it topped the charts the way it did.
Right. It's just great.
It's fucking perfect.
Banger.
Dude. So with all of that being said, they had released this album, right? And something that actually ended up happening was so pretty much after Jar of Flies was released, Alice in Chains was set to go on tour with Metallica. Metallica was going on a headlining tour. I think they actually ended up I can't remember who they replaced him with. I think it might have been Guns N' Roses, if I'm not wrong. This was 94, so you may have to look that up real quick, Hunter. But while I'm telling the story, you look that up. We'll continue on that. Pretty much what had happened was during one of the...
That was 92, the Guns N' Roses tour.
Okay. So during one of the practices with Alice in Chains, so also keep in mind, Lane Staley had just recently gotten clean from heroin, went to rehab, and was no longer doing heroin at this point when they were about to go into this tour. What happened was when they were in the middle of doing some practices right before the tour was supposed to start, Lane relapsed.
Yep.
And because of this relapse, Alice in Chains broke up, actually, for a minute.
Yes.
Because both Sean Kenny, the drummer, as well as Jerry Cantrell, at that point, both vowed to never play with Lane again. Because at this point, like, he's falling asleep at practices, can't even do his vocal performances. And, like, at this point, like, he had been strong on heroin since, like 1990.
Like a big time at this point.
Oh,
though.
this is like
it's
bad.
almost it's reaching a climax here. We're seeing the build up of Lane's downfall.
Oh, definitely. And this was kind of the start of it.
But fun fact, that tour that Metallica was going on in 1994, Danzig, Suicidal Tendencies, Candlebox, and Fight were the billed bands. So one of them...
Candlebox. It was Candlebox.
Candlebox replaced Alice in Chains?
Yes, so Candlebox ended up being the band that replaced them. And
the live shit Binge and Purge 1994 was recorded on that tour.
no shit.
So, yeah, another little fun fact. Shit Hits the Sheds tour.
Okay.
So,
Damn. Well,
so Alice in Chains dropped out of the Shit Hits the Sheds tour.
well, also to go along with that tour, there's footage that you can even find online.
James making fun of...
Yeah.
Well, not just James, but they were all kind of in on it.
Yeah, a lot of the band was actually during one of their shows were actually making jokes, and like James at one point started slapping his middle and index finger on his forearm, pretty much acting like he's about to shoot up heroin. They were making jokes and playing like a really bad version of Man in a Box. Like they were just actively at shows,
even
making fun of Alice.
Even though how unprofessional that is, you can understand Metallica's frustration. Because they were going to be a big draw for that tour. I mean, think about it. Alice in Chains versus Candlebox.
Yeah,
Candlebox isn't nowhere near Alice in Chains' level of popularity. So I can understand why they'd be upset about that, because that was going to be a huge draw for that tour.
Definitely. And
So,
even though...
But even though that was very unprofessional, I understand their frustration still.
Yes, definitely. And like also, mind you, Metallica had also, I think they were on the Black Album around this time too, weren't they?
This
94?
was 94. Yeah, that was going into like when they started doing that kind of weird they started doing like the load and reload kind of thing.
Yeah. Which I mean, I guess that this is just to give a checkpoint to more bad decisions being made by Metallica in the mid 90s, but we will get into that on our Metallica episode when we do eventually get that done. Oh my God, I can't wait to make fun of Lars for an hour or two, because that is essentially what that episode's going to be.
That's pretty easy though.
He does it to himself.
It's only because he takes himself so seriously.
Exactly. So to kind of go back into Alice in Chains themselves. At this point, obviously, Lane had kind of realized once his band had split up, he's like, well, fuck. What am I going to do now? Like, he kind of just realized, he's like, I fucked up, dude. So he went back into rehab and then got clean again. But obviously, at this point, Jerry at this point was on the mindset of I'm never playing with Lane again. So this is around the time that Jerry Cantrell actually starts his solo career.
Yep.
Just obviously he's named Jerry Cantrell. That's about as simple as that gets for that. But that is pretty much now at this point. And everybody in the band also at this point was kind of starting to grow apart and do their own thing. I'm not really sure what Mike Inez or Sean Kenny were really doing at the time. If I'm not wrong, I think Sean might have even been doing some touring with Jerry Cantrell for his solo stuff. I could be wrong on that again.
Would
but-
make sense because those are the only two members that have been in Alice in Chains since it started.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if there's anybody he's going to pick to go tour with him, I would imagine those are the guys. But with Lane now getting clean and he's out of rehab, he's looking for something to do, right? He actually ends up starting a super group known as Mad Season. Mad Season consists of John Saunders from The Walkabouts, Mike McCready from Pearl Jam, and Barrett Martin from the band Screaming Trees.
And of course, Lane Staley.
And Lane Staley on vocals, of course. Right. I personally am actually not all that familiar with them. I'm gonna be honest here on that. So we could probably, we're not gonna go really into Mad Season too much. They did play some shows. They ended up putting out an album.
I don't know anything.
Yeah,
Great. That's a pretty good song.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know anything.
That one was pretty much like the big hit from that band. And honestly, I mean, like, they were definitely a little more bare bones than Alice in Chains was as far as the musical compositions went. They weren't really doing anything too crazy. And like, I think this is also a good prime example of like Lane Staley made a big part of Alice in Chains, but without Jerry Cantrell, there is no Alice in Chains.
Because Jerry wrote the song.
Honestly, though, like, I've never was too big a fan of Mad Season, and like,
I'll be honest, I only know that song.
Yeah, same here. And like,
most people do.
Honestly, I mean, this also just goes back to the point that I made earlier about like, without Jerry Cantrell, you don't have the Alice in Chains sound. Because Lane, to me, I don't feel on any of that stuff that it really has as much of the pizzazz. It's kind of that fucking duo, Jerry Cantrell and Lane Staley. You need that together to have that classic sound, you know?
Right.
So after a little bit of time has passed, about a year kind of goes by at this point, and it's now to 1995. Lane actually ends up making up with everybody and rejoins Alice in Chains. At this point, Alice in Chains is now going to go into the studio to go record their self-titled album, Alice in Chains. Originally,
with the three-legged dog cover.
Yep, the three-legged dog. And because of that three-legged dog, it was originally nicknamed Tripod, because that was just pretty much what they had nicknamed the dog. Their self-titled album came out November 7th of 1995. And personally, for me, this is, I don't know, it is still, for me, a tie between this album and Dirt for different reasons. A lot of the lyrical content is definitely darker because this is where Lane really starts taking over in a lot of the lyrical writing, which is kind of, for some people, may have raised some ears where you're like, well, he's the vocalist. Why wouldn't he be writing the lyrics?
Right. And, you know, a lot of bands, the vocalist does not write the lyrics.
Exactly. Well, also something to keep in mind is Jerry Cantrell is also, he does half the vocals already on a lot of Alice in Chains stuff.
Which is true, yeah.
And I would say with this album, this is actually this has a lot more of Jerry Cantrell's vocals actually like showcasing on this album. Whereas when it comes to all their previous releases, Lane was still kind of the main focus for a lot of those albums.
Think about the first song on the record, Grind.
Yeah, that's mostly Jerry Cantrell doing those vocals.
And that is one of my favorite Alice in Chains songs.
Yep, actually even a little bit of backstory behind the lyrics of Grind. So around this point was kind of the peak of the publicity of Alice in Chains' drug use, you know. Mm-hmm. For a lot of the media stations that covered a lot of bands like this, they were kind of going off rumors that were being told that like Lane Staley ended up losing an arm due to gangrene. Like he had abscesses all over his body from his where he's injecting his heroin.
I did hear those rumors. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and like at this point, they were just kind of fed up of hearing about it because, like, yes, they wanted to be able to express what they've gone through with their tribulations with drug use and abuse, but they were not wanting to be kind of thrown under a bus like this of just being dumb drunkies.
Well, they didn't want to be remembered for it.
Exactly. So like Grind was pretty much like an FU, pretty much telling all of those people coming up with those rumors and all the media outlets kind of putting that out there like, fuck you. You don't get to say who I am. I am who I am, and that's how it is.
Let the sun never blind your eyes, Chad.
Let the sun never blind your eyes. Goddamn right. So as we stated, some of the great songs like Grind, there's some other standout songs for me in
I
particular.
mean, again, is another big hit on that, and Heaven Beside You. Oh my God, Heaven Beside You is such a good song.
Oh my God, yes it is.
Oh my God, what a good song, dude.
Fucking phenomenal. 100% it is. Like
It's one of my cross-out songs, dude.
oh, definitely it is. The Nothing song, that is a really, really weird song.
Yeah.
Like there, because like it kind of goes between a lot of the main song and then the chorus is like I don't even know how to really describe it. It just kind of goes into this, like it almost feels goofy.
Yeah.
Like the chorus sounds kind of goofy, and like the lyrics for that song, I mean, the lyrics for the chorus itself is like the words to the Nothing song sticks on the brain like peanut butter on, no, it sticks to the mouth like peanut butter on the brain. It always stays the same. It always stays the same. And then it changes back, which is kind of like an irony to it. So it's like the Nothing song is kind of just like the spaced, I would imagine to me, the spaced out mindset of being high. Like that's kind of to me what it kind of screams
being
out.
high on heroin.
Exactly, where it's like the ups and downs, the highs and lows of life and doing drugs and shit. Obviously, I'm just speculating right now on that, but to me, that's what it kind of screams to me with the context of what all the lyrical content around this band has always been.
I mean, all lyrics are open to interpretation.
Exactly. So going through this, like this is also an album, like I said, where Lane Staley was doing a lot of the lyrical writing and stuff, right? And like for him, originally it was very almost for like what you hear from a lot of people who write about the shitty parts of their life, where it's like, oh, this was like, I do this because it's therapeutic. It's why I write the way I do. For Lane, this didn't really do it for him. Apparently it just put him in an even deeper hole than he was already in. So from this point, this is kind of just the end of it for Lane, really, when it comes to just him not really being able to control everything going on, because the manager of Alice in Chains, I think her name is Susan Silver. Her last name is Silver. I know that for a fact. The manager at the time had said in an interview where it was just the most depressing thing to watch Lane come into all these recording sessions. He was high. A lot of this, like it was hard for him, like he'd be falling asleep. At one point he actually would literally be like literally in a meeting and then just like dozing off and not being able to even stay awake because he was so fucked up. And like it was apparently like this album was just a painful process. It went on for so long because of a lot of Lane's abuse of drugs and shit.
Yeah.
And like as sad as it is, like it only kind of continues on and only really gets worse from here, you know?
It does too, and that's sucks, man.
It really, really does. And kind of moving from that, going to what is probably one of the most well-known pieces of media to do with Alice in Chains, the MTV Unplugged session, where pretty much MTV at the time, the TV channel, would do unplugged sessions where they had artists come in and do acoustic renditions of their discography.
Any big time artist that was around back then did.
Yeah.
I mean, Kiss, Nirvana, obviously Alice in Chains, like we're talking about now.
Yep, and this came out in July 30th of 1996, so 1 year after the self-titled album had released. During the recording of this, which I didn't even know this until researching, Lane Staley was so fucked up during this entire session. They had to have somebody staying right by his bench to hold him up because he couldn't even sit up straight.
Yeah.
And it even got to a point where they actually had to, apparently one of the songs that they ended up doing, among many of the others, they had to restart the song 20 times.
Yeah, I was going to say it was something like 20 times they had to keep redoing the song.
Because he literally just couldn't handle
they
it.
had to redo basically every song at least twice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, just to give you an idea of, like, at this point, Lane wasn't even really able to, or at least from what it seems, wasn't able to control his own impulses to pretty much be doing heroin, which is kind of one of the sad realities of that drug, where it's like, it just takes over your priorities, whether you want it to or not. And nobody really wants it to, but it just does.
Yeah.
So kind of moving on from that,
Another interesting fact is the Unplugged session. Even the bass was acoustic.
Yes.
Which Mike Inez was playing an Alvarez 4070.
Ooh.
So kind of a single cut acoustic, with that kind of round horn on the bottom.
Yeah.
So and then Jerry Cantrell was playing a Guild JF55. Beautiful guitar.
Yes, it fucking is.
Big fan of Guild guitars. My grandpa owns one. He's owned since probably the 70s. Got a soft spot for him. So it's pretty cool to see that.
Yes. So pretty much going from that, Alice in Chains at this point kind of just, they go on their next tour. I believe the tour immediately after that was the one with Kiss.
Yeah, I believe you're right.
Yeah. So with that tour, this is actually, unfortunately, going to be the last live performance that Lane Staley ever does. During one of their performances,
And it
with
was
Kiss,
some time before his death, too.
Yes, this was, and
That's why it's so bizarre that it's this early that it was his last performance.
Yes. So pretty much from this point, Alice in Chains was kind of, obviously, they were still kind of going up, ramping up in popularity. Well, Lane, during one of their shows with Kiss, he ends up ODing backstage and has to be rushed out pretty much to be, like, make sure that he survives, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, at this point, Lane never does a live show again. A lot of this is attributed, obviously, to the drug use. He just kind of started becoming more and more reclusive, staying at home a lot more, and, like, pretty much from this point,
He basically lost all his teeth, too, during this time period.
Yeah, at this point, he was also, a lot of his drug use, like, you could see a physical difference in his appearance.
Oh,
at
he
this
was
point.
thin as a rail, missing teeth, white as a ghost.
Like, it is.
The people that would see him out in public said he looked like scary.
There was even times where people he knew intimately didn't recognize him after not
Because
seeing him for a few years.
He basically looked like he was dying.
Yeah.
He was dying.
Pretty much. And, like, really at this point, like, that, while that was his last live performance, it was not his last recorded.
Right. Yeah. He made recordings after that.
Yeah. So there was about 3 songs that they ended up doing. So one of which was actually probably another one of my favorite songs by Alice in Chains, "Get Born Again." That one,
yeah.
that
Amazing song.
Yes, that song can be actually found on the 1999 compilation 2-disc set Music Bank.
Twas also released as a single.
Yes, yeah. So "Get Born Again" was released as a single, as well as the song "Died." Both of those songs were recorded during some sessions that they did in a studio, where, again, Lane came in so high out of his mind that, like, he almost couldn't even perform a lot of these. And actually, something that we were going to get in a conversation before we even started recording, where something that Hunter had actually brought up to me was, like, well, once he started losing teeth, wouldn't he have had like somewhat of a lisp?
Right. Kind of thing like this.
Which actually was a thing that they actually had to.
I'm not making fun of him. Just saying. It's a reality.
Right.
Is it? having teeth affects the way you talk.
and sing in particular,
Yeah.
considering it's the whole point of like, being able to do that. You kind of have to have the full mouth structure. And with him missing a lot, I think at this point he was missing almost all of his teeth when he recorded these two songs. And yeah, they actually had to try and work around his lisp because like it's like you can hear an ever so slight difference in his voice. And there's certain points, if you really listen, you can actually almost still hear a little bit of that lisp.
Oh yeah.
It's not super heavy, and like it's kind of just like ever so slightly there. And like I said, they had to work to
He
get
still
it
sounds
taken
like
out.
Lane, but kind of like a zombie almost.
Yes, like it is a very big.
It's
difference.
noticeably zombie like his performance. And growing up, my dad would play Get Born Again a lot on his MP3 player or in the car or wherever. And doing the research and looking back onto that song, it's crazy to think
yeah.
about that Lane was basically on his deathbed
Yeah.
recording these songs.
So,
And how hard that must have been for the guys to, see that.
oh yeah, dude, that can never be easy to watch. And like one of the things that
You're
I
watching your friend kill himself, basically.
yeah, exactly. And like one thing that was in an interview with a lot of the guys from Alice in Chains, they were even saying like it was one of those things where like obviously all of them were still having the drug issues themselves, nowhere near to the point of where Lane was, but to a point where it was like some people would even like I've even heard people say, well, why wouldn't they do everything in their power to go and help him? And like they did.
You
Like
can't help somebody that doesn't want help.
well, on top of the fact you can't help someone that doesn't want to be helped. Like at that point, he had already given up. Like that's something that it's like you can't necessarily take that choice from someone. If they're going to do drugs, you can't just strap them down and tell them they're going to change their lives.
Right.
Because like
If anything, it's going to make him want to do it worse.
well, that's the thing. It's like now he thinks of himself as a disappointment, and like he's like he had completely convinced himself that he's going to die doing drugs now. Like he was in the mindset of he is going to die doing drugs, and he's never going to quit.
Yeah.
Because keep in mind, he's also been in and out of rehab 13 times at this point.
Right.
13 times. Most people don't even live long enough to get to that 13th time.
Right.
Or even care enough if that's what the issue may be. But pretty much from this point, the one and only thing that he recorded after those two songs was actually a cover that he was going to do of Another Brick in the Wall. So he was going to be doing that with some of the members from Rage Against the Machine because he was actually good friends with Tom Morello, Lane
That
Staley.
makes sense, yeah.
And that when they did go to record that, I don't know if they ever released that, I don't think. But apparently he no longer had any of his teeth at this point. Unfortunately, which
Just another brick in the wall.
this was in 1998 that he went to go record this. But yes,
Did it ever happen?
I don't know. I have not been able to find it, so we will have to do a little bit more due diligence on that for when we go look into this after the fact. But yeah, so at this point, that was the last thing that he ever went into a studio and recorded was that cover of Another Brick in the Wall. Actually, no, I take that back. There is a recording of his vocals. I don't know if they have the full song. I know I've heard snippets of it though. So it does exist somewhere out there on the internet. So from this point, this is probably about to be.
It is class of 99.
Okay, yes.
Another brick in the wall.
Yep. So that is something that you actually can find then. So this is going to be the depressing part of the episode because we are now going to get into the last few years of the life of Lane Staley. And around this point, this is pretty much just Jerry Cantrell kind of doing his solo career, touring around with that, and kind of just doing his own thing. While this was happening, though, Lane was now suffering from a deep, dark depression due to the death of his ex-fiancée. And it was something that hit him really hard for the reason of she had died because of complications due to her heroin use. Because she was just as bad as Lane was when it came to the addiction. Around that point, he was put on suicide watch for like a few days because of it, because they knew how much it would upset him the moment it was found out. And trust me, it did. Because what the drummer, Sean Kenny, had claimed at that point, I mean, a little bit further in the future during an interview, was that it was the world's longest suicide. Because he had pretty much, once this had happened, he stopped going out in public altogether and locked himself in his apartment from like 98 until 2002. Like, think about that. Never leaving unless you're going out to maybe go get food. But even then, like, both his
Or
drugs,
heroin.
well, no, but all of his drugs were delivered to his apartment.
Well, that's convenient.
Well, it's convenient, but also at the same time, it's fucked up to think all of these drug
Oh, it's
dealers.
horrible.
Well, the drug dealers saw him in the condition he was in.
They don't care. They're making money.
Well, that's the thing. But like, even then, I don't know. To me, it's like I can never get past the fact of thinking it's like these
See,
are.
we have a conscience, though.
That's yeah. I guess that is a difference.
If you're dealing heroin, you probably don't have
yeah,
much
it's
of
one
that.
of the. I mean, even like in a marketing standpoint, like
No offense.
I would think even like thinking of like, well, if he dies, that's one less guy buying heroin from me now. Like,
Yeah, but
I know.
they're always going to have a clientele.
That is unfortunately true. So-
Yeah, it
and
sucks. It's sad, but true.
but with that being said, like Lane was literally trying to like actively trying to kill himself with his drug use now. Like
Yeah.
he was making an effort to do that.
Yeah.
And with that, he had now also picked up an addiction to crack, which I also didn't know. I knew about the heroin use, but doing the research as well.
Yeah, in his later years, crack and heroin, man.
And like one of his favorite things to do was an 8-ball, which is cocaine and heroin together.
Speedball.
Speedball, sorry.
8-ball is like an eighth of a gram of cocaine or something.
Okay,
like
okay.
that.
I'm close. See the
I'm
goes
not.
to show-
I am no expert, but I think that's what it is.
more so than myself, questionable at best.
But speedball.
Yes. So he was at this point doing speedballs.
Same way a lot of people go, though.
And unfortunately, as the years progressed on, moving up to 2002, Lane Staley was actually was hanging out with Mike Starr, the original bassist of Alice in Chains that had departed back in '92. During this hangout session at Lane's apartment, Mike had very visibly noticed how bad Lane was. He had long ass hair. He was literally 84 pounds when he died. And that was pretty much what he was at that point as well. Like he looked white as a ghost. He was so thin. He had actually started getting abscesses on his arm. So the rumor became true. And like, it was just one of those things where he just looked at him and he's like, I need to, like, he threatened to call 911 to get an ambulance to come and pretty much make it so he wouldn't die. And then pretty much at that point, they got into a verbal argument pretty much at that point too, because I believe at that time, Mike Starr was actually now on a pill addiction to like benzodiazepine, I think it was.
Yeah, benzos.
Yep. And Lane was now started criticizing him when they were arguing about his use of drugs. Like, how can you tell me this if you're doing that? Kind of thing. And it pretty
It's
much,
like, bro, I'm not doing heroin anymore.
well, no, that's the thing. Well, either way, like
It's still bad.
Mike
It's still
Starr's
bad,
drug
but-
addiction was pretty fucking bad itself.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, when Mike pretty much threatened to call 911 to save his life, Lane told him, if you call 911, I will never speak to you again. I will never associate with you. And at that point, Mike Starr pretty much just walked out and never saw Lane again. That next day, Lane died from an OD on a speedball.
Yep.
And they did not find him until about like 2 weeks after the fact, I believe, in his apartment, because his mom got a call from whoever was working at the bank that Lane went through and noticed that there hadn't been any activity. So she went to go to his apartment, found it was locked, called the police for a wellness check, and they pretty much found him. And they had found so much drug drug paraphernalia all around his apartment. Morphine, crack, cocaine, everything you could probably think of under the sun he had in that apartment. Hidden everywhere. He had stashes everywhere.
Oh yeah.
And like, it's just like, it's a very sad thing to see that kind of go the way it did. Like, also just like see it progress as time goes on.
Yeah, it just goes to show what a trap that can be.
100%. And with the death of Lane Staley, we can now actually kind of start going into
The rebirth
the rebirth.
of Alice in Chains.
Yes. So as I had previously stated, Jerry Cantrell was kind of doing his solo career stuff. Yeah, I know. Trust me. I'm almost a little relieved to get over the most depressing part of this. Doing the
Sigh of
research
relief there.
for the 90s era of Alice in Chains could not be more soul crushing, like at all.
Seriously, dude.
So for a little bit of a refresher, and we're kind of rounding pretty close to the end of this episode, we will now go into the rebirth of Alice in Chains.
And
So-
I remember when this album came out, dude.
Oh yeah, well,
It's
even
huge.
before we get to the album, pretty much what we mean by the rebirth, after Lane Staley had passed away, about 4 years had passed before anything Alice in Chains related would ever happen again. And at that point, nobody ever thought it would. But on March 10th of 2006, Alice in Chains actually played their first show.
Thank
After-
you, Ann and Nancy Wilson.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, because they were actually asked to play the VH1 Decades Rock live show for honoring the band Heart.
Which is, you know, it's a cool thing that this rebirth happened where it did, which was Donald Trump's Taj Mahal Casino and Resort in Atlantic City, which, fun fact, ended up becoming the Hard Rock Cafe, Casino, and Hotel.
No shit.
Yep. And pretty cool place, actually. Got a lot of cool shit there. And I just think it's a really cool transition for, you know, because it's that's a pretty big piece of history for Alice in Chains. Like that's the kind of their revival, like we were saying.
Oh, yeah. And pretty much what the plan was for this small performance from Alice in Chains, they were actually set to play the song Rooster with the vocalist of Heart.
Mrs. Ann Wilson.
Oh, yes. And
I don't know if she's married.
who knows? But I mean, it would have been a cool thing to see. But for
Either way, we love you,
Well,
Wilson sisters.
when they were doing the camera check and they were kind of just going through before anything was actually recorded, they had a guy named William Duvall come and actually just sing just for that, because since Ann Wilson was not ready to come down yet. Well, she ended up actually catching part of his performance of Rooster and decided that, no, I don't think I should actually be the one. You're the one who deserves to do this performance. And if you watch that performance, that's William Duvall with Alice in Chains performing for the first time. And a bit of
my God, what an impact!
what an impact it indeed had. And then a bit of backstory on how that actually ended up coming to be was Jerry Cantrell back in 2002, I believe it was. No, 2000. 2000, Jerry actually ended up...
Y2K, baby.
Oh, yeah. He ended up finding and discovering William Duvall's band Comes With the Fall, was they were playing out in Hollywood. And from that, they actually started a friendship, and eventually it turned into him becoming the new vocalist of Alice in Chains.
He also plays guitar too.
Yes, he does. So they now have actually technically almost a second guitarist on some of their songs.
Yeah, and honestly, William's fantastic.
Yes. So
I really like his. I really like him.
I do as well. And we're about to get into the albums with him in a second here. One thing that I've heard consistently is that you can never replace Lane. They should have never hired William Duvall because he doesn't sound anything like him.
But that's besides the point.
Yes. And also, one thing to keep in mind as well, Alice in Chains was never trying to quote unquote replace Lane Staley. For them, it was more of their way of moving on
Yeah,
with
it's
the
a
situation.
healing. It's a healing process.
It is
really,
100%.
for them.
It is a healing process.
That's what I gather, at least.
Well, and that's even what they've said. It was meant for more of a healing process. And like originally, when they did that show at the Vault, there was no talks of Alice in Chains even getting back together. They were
Right.
just there to play a show.
They were jamming, but that kind of set in motion that started the engine that would become the revival of Alice in Chains' career.
Oh yeah, and now kind of going into that,
Which that would bring us to Black Gives Way to Blue, which I remember when this album came out.
yeah, this was.
I thought it was fantastic. I was too young to know that wasn't Lane Staley, but looking back, it's okay because Check My Brain came out as a single.
That was probably
Fucking awesome song, dude.
fucking phenomenal song.
Oh, dude, that opening riff. It's so like dark and like, oh, it's so good.
Oh yeah, and definitely with the Rebirth, there is a little bit of a sound change, which a lot of people did not like. Actually, I've gotten a lot more like criticism about those albums from people more than I have found people who like them, and like
I like them.
I personally do as well. And like a quick reminder, all of the stuff that had Lane Staley was with the mood of what their lives were, dark, depressing, and drug filled.
Right, and this is such a different light on the band. Like I said, Check My Brain's a great song. Your Decision, always have loved that song since it came out. And Lesson Learned, fantastic tune also.
Personally, for me, the songs that really stand out outside of Check My Brain was actually Last of My Kind.
That's another awesome one too.
And Acid Bubble. Acid
Yes.
Bubble is probably one of my favorite songs on this album, in all honesty.
That song is awesome.
And yeah,
I mean, the album's good. You can fight me.
100%. And like with
the album's great.
Definitely with that, there's honestly around this time, kind of as you could probably tell, there's a lot more stories to tell with a lot of the shit that went down in the 90s.
Of course.
With the new revival of Alice in Chains, they are now old men. They don't really have anything outside of, they just play shows and write albums now. They don't really get into the tabloids too much anymore.
They just want to.
They want a simpler life.
Yeah. Considering how fucking crazy. So that leads us into their next album.
Yeah, so
2013. So the last one was Black Gives Way to Blue is 2009. So a 4-year gap, nearly.
Well, yeah, and then obviously there was
till the next album, and I remember the hype around this album. I was when I was in middle school, man. We were talking about this album. We couldn't wait for it to come out.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, dude. Like this one, honestly. So I don't know about you, but with this album, this is for me and a lot of other people where they start kind of going down a little bit. Not necessarily because yes and no. There was a lot. I feel that there's more filler on this album than there was on Black Gives Way to Blue.
There is.
But this, to me, still at the same time feels like a part 2 to Black Gives Way to Blue.
Well, it's got the same kind of, atmosphere, I guess, for lack of a better word. But it's pretty good, though. I need to listen to it more, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, this one, so for me, like...
Hollow was a pretty good song.
Yeah, Hollow.
Stone
and The Devil Put the Dinosaurs Here, which is the title track, were two of the... as well as Phantom Limb,
yeah.
As well. Those are
Limb's
the 3 singles off of that, which personally, for me, I think those are also the best songs on the album. So, I mean, the singles were picked for a reason.
Right. They're good.
Definitely are. And like personally, I don't have too much to say about this album nearly as much as obviously the older stuff if you haven't already told or could tell, those were kind of where me and Hunter, at least, our hearts really lie. And a lot of the fans of Alice in Chains really lie on those first couple albums.
Yeah. And it's not taking away from their later releases because they're fantastic.
Not by any means.
But yeah, I mean, the hearts of fans in just listeners, casual listeners alike. I mean, it just lies within the first couple albums. So
Exactly. So kind of now even moving on from this point. So between the release of The Devil Put the Dinosaurs Here and their next release, which is their most recent to date, this was actually I was actually able to see Alice in Chains before this next album came out.
ooh, I bet you that was a good show.
Really good show. Unfortunately, obviously Lane was not there to perform. Sadly,
Well, of course, we weren't even alive for those performances.
I was 2 years old when he died in 2002.
Yeah, I was
so.
4. So
Exactly. So it's definitely one of those things I'll never be able to say I saw Lane, but
you saw
I
Jerry
saw
Cantrell.
I got to see Alice in Chains play some
Mike and
fire
Ez is
songs.
still in the band, right? And
Yes,
then- and then,
yeah. So now it's just Sean Kenny and Jerry Cantrell as original members, and then Mike Inez and William Duvall.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's the classic lineup just with William instead of Lane.
Yes.
So
So,
which is pretty cool because I mean that's the same vein of musicality.
yes, and like even with that, like with the sound change, they still sound like Alice in Chains to a degree.
Oh, yeah,
not
I
as
mean-
dark. They are a more cathartic version.
Well, Jerry Cantrell is Jerry Cantrell.
Yeah, you can't you they
know.
even said in an interview when someone asked him like how were you able to keep your old sound when you guys came into this? And Jerry just kind of laughed and was like, "What do you mean? This is just the music I write normally. Like why would it be different?"
Right.
It's like nothing changed. I mean, yeah, Lane isn't here, but I'm still
But
writing the same music I ever did.
I wrote most of the songs
Right,
anyway. So,
exactly.
yeah. So yeah.
And yeah, so now kind of moving on to this new album, which is titled Rainy or Fog, which was released on August 24th of 2018. So this is a pretty decent sized gap between album releases.
This is 5 years, over 5 years.
Yes, sir. Yes,
5
sir.
years and a couple months.
Mm-hmm.
May 28th, 2013 to August 24th, 2018.
And for me, this is obviously, I was even waiting for this release because at this point, I was headfirst into Alice in Chains
Yeah.
at this point in my life. So, like, with this, how much of this have you listened to yourself?
I've listened to the whole thing at least twice for this episode. And then I listened to it when it came out also. I mean, the one I know that song.
Yep.
And Deaf Ears, Blind Eyes, I know that song.
Yep, one's actually probably Deaf Ears, Blind Eyes, in my opinion, is the highlight of the album.
I agree.
And-
From what I remember from listening to it, but
Yes.
yeah.
And with this album, I like particular songs off of it. My favorites being Deaf Ear, Blind Eyes, Red Giant, and The One You Know. Outside of those, I don't really remember any of the songs. This, to me, was one of the least memorable albums from the band. A lot of it feels very droning, which, I mean, for Alice in Chains is pretty common, but it feels like old man droning almost, if you get what I mean.
Which is okay in the right sense.
It is, but to me, it doesn't really speak to me in any way that anything before this album ever came out.
I got to give it another chance, but from what I remember, it was I didn't feel like skipping anything. So
No, and it's not necessarily, there's no bad songs on the album, but to me, this one never grabbed me the way that I wanted it to, which for me, when this came out, I was kind of disappointed in it.
yeah, from as far as the Duvall era stuff goes, I'd say Black Gives Way to Blue is the best.
Oh, 100%. That is the highlight, because that was also them coming
It's kind of
right
like
off
one, two. It's like in chronological order. It kind of goes down.
a
They're
little.
still good, but
It's not even necessarily that they get worse. It's more that it doesn't pique my interest like anything before ever has from them. But with that being said, that is Alice in Chains.
and the hell of a fucking roller coaster ride. I hope you didn't run out of Kleenex, and I hope you listened to it on the way to the store to go get more.
Exactly. Well, now that we're done with this depressing thing, yeah, because if you ran out of Kleenex, you might want to go get those before you go to jack off tonight, or maybe if you
Yeah,
piddle your
because
paddle.
you're gonna need to clean up that cum.
Yeah, or that squirt, whatever you do, I ain't judging. If you want to do what you
Even
do.
if it's poop, I mean, if that's what you're into, whatever.
Hey, man, someone's got to be into it.
All right, that was Alice in Chains. I'm your co-host, Hunter Heath Kelfrick.
And I am Chad, also known as my actual name, Christian Miracle.
That's not his actual name.
No.
His actual name is Chad.
Yeah. Only Chad. I only have the one name. And then is there anything that you want to shout out, Hunter, as far as like any social media you would want people to follow you on, anything like that?
Nope.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't really use social media. So.
Hey, there you go.
Just if you like it, drop us a like, and if you have something to say, shoot us a comment. We're always open to we're always open to what you have to say.
100%.
Even if bad or good,
Yeah, any criticism, any info we may have gotten wrong, or any stories to add that you might know that we might not have mentioned.
In the future, we could even do a follow-up to this episode because it is our first episode. So,
Yeah, we're kind of just winging this one. So
we're
hopefully
testing
you
the
like
waters and seeing where we go. So I hope you enjoyed our banter for the past close to 2 hours.
Definitely. And also,
So-
that being said, if there is any suggestions or anything that you would want us to actually cover in a episode, whether it be just a topic about music or even
A genre?
a genre, a musical group that you want us to do, or an artist of any kind,
We're open to any genres.
100%.
If
Yeah.
we don't like it, we will criticize it.
Yeah, we will talk shit about things we don't like. We'll
But-
cover it, but we won't like it, and you will hear it.
And if we do happen to like it, even though it's out of our realm, we will admit it.
Yeah, 100%. I have no
We
problem
are
telling you.
we are very honest people about our opinions, and I hope you enjoyed it.
100%. So that being said, as far as shout outs for any of my stuff, you can follow me on Instagram at bean_chief_Chad. And you can also find my other podcast, Horse Tank, on any streaming services, that podcasts are found, as well as this podcast, wherever you may be listening. We are on just about everything, so make sure to give us a like, a comment, follow us, download an episode, depending on what you're listening to it on. We love you.
Well, we are your local audio junkies.
Hell yeah.
We love you.
Peace.